Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday, December 4th, 2019. How are you? How are you feeling today? I understand I just got a frantic, not really frantic, but an odd, unexpected text message. My wife driving to work wanted to let me know, I guess, today. Does this mean it's live? Hillary Clinton is on the Howard Stern show. So that's something. It's also the day of the first House Judiciary Committee impeachment hearings. Official, honest to God, everybody's calling them impeachment hearings, and the intention is to formulate articles of impeachment for the House, presumably to vote on at some point, as opposed to the, well, yeah, sort of, I mean, we're talking about impeachment, but we're not sure whether to call them impeachment hearings or not until we're in court, at which point, why not? We'll go ahead and admit that they're impeachment hearings, kind of impeachment hearings. I don't know if it's riveting television impeachment hearings today. There won't be, I don't think, fact witness testimony scheduled, and it may be that the Judiciary Committee doesn't bother with any. They're talking, it's like a Tuesday or Friday episode of the Kagro in the Morning Show today is essentially what's going on. It is a bit more of a political science episode. As I understand it, they'll be hearing from legal experts about, all right, what are we really talking about here? And do the things we've heard about rise to the level of impeachment? Is this what we ought to be doing about these things? Is there something else we should be considering? Should we hit them with rocks at any point? I don't know if that's really on the agenda, but that should probably be there. Much to catch up on today. And I guess President Trump streaking homeward, and he might actually be streaking at this point, homeward after the brief stop in Europe for a NATO conference. Of course, he doesn't like NATO, and NATO doesn't like him, and so he's on his way back rather more quickly than was originally anticipated. Apparently, this is a big deal. People on Twitter are talking about it. He did one of his signature, I'm just going to blather about anything I feel like blathering about for 40 minutes press conferences today. This is distinct from the I'm going to do anything I want to blather about radio show that we do here for 2 hours each day. I'm not president, nor do I have the leathern face of a half-inflated basketball, but, you know, that's just one of the differences between the two of us. Lots of people circulating the video clip taken, I think it might have been the Canadian broadcasting folks, CBC folks who captured this video of, I guess, some sort of casual mixer among the NATO heads of state. We saw Justin Trudeau there, Boris Johnson somehow infecting this conversation too. And I'm surprised to see him there. You'd think that, I guess, that he would be there to defend Trump in some way. Who else was there? Emmanuel Macron was there. I did not immediately recognize the others there, although I'm told that also partly visible in the circle for a while is Princess Anne of England. Of course, it's London. Well, I guess she's princess of even more than England these days. But London hosting the conference. And the conversation, partly audible, in fact, and that's not usually the case either, is about how ridiculous Trump was and that they're late for this event because Trump had a 40-minute off-the-cuff Q&A, as he often does, and that this was frustrating and annoying to the other leaders, and I guess they thought it was rather hilarious. The best part of it, or the most audible best part of it, is Justin Trudeau drinking a beer, by the way, in case you were wondering whether he was the world leader you'd most like to have a beer with. It doesn't matter what you want, he's going to have a beer with you. And he thought it was interesting watching the Trump staffer's jaws drop to the floor as he went on. And I guess, I don't even know that people are talking about what Trump wasted 40 minutes on yesterday so much as everyone else's reaction to it. And now that that's been circulating, we figured this would set off an aneurysm in Trump, maybe literally. But so far, no doctor is willing to say so. But instead, he says, well, instead of having the regular or participating in the regular post-conference press availability, I'm simply going to go right home because I'm angry at all of you guys for laughing at me. And I don't want you guys making fun of me going off for 40 minutes anymore, I guess. But anyway, so on his way home, as if to prove the point. And but don't worry, we're respected around the world again. That's what Donald Trump has brought to us. Just a little bit of film of world leaders, allies, literally laughing at us, literally laughing at Donald Trump anyway. And now he's on his way home. So there you have that. That's also big news. There was more video circulating as well. We enjoyed watching part of the royal family receiving Donald Trump and Melania Trump after or during this cocktail reception, I guess, while Trudeau was quaffing beers. But the big deal here was Princess Anne. Again, video evidence of her pretty much refusing. Oh, hang on, I gotta answer the telephone here. Just bring me there we are, bring me the button, and then I can answer the phone. Princess Anne apparently refusing to take part in the receiving line, even after being quietly signaled by the Queen, you should be over here. Prince Charles is here. Camilla Parker Bowles is here. Where are you? And she just gives the palms up shrug, like, get the hell out of here. You're the Queen, yes, but I'm Princess Anne, and I'm just not coming over there to shake that moron's hand. And I guess it worked out for her. And now he's going home. So well done, well played, rest of the world. He's leaving early, and he won't be babbling to the press. Now, we should say, we wish maybe that they had kept him there longer so that they could make more fun of him. We didn't really want him back. We had no rush about getting him back here. But, okay, well, it worked out for the best, I think. NATO still exists as an alliance as far as I know. We may find out different when the president gets back. We'll see what happens about the Western Alliance after that. In the meantime, let's see what happens when Greg Dworkin rounds up the rest of the news, or even that news for that matter. I'll talk about that again if you want, Greg. Good morning.
Right. Well, it was just good because I'm reading the Independent in England covering this.
It's good because they're independent.
Trump calls Trudeau two-faced, cancels press conference, and leaves NATO summit early after video of world leaders laughing at him.
Oh, no.
And so that pretty much sums it up. And the funny thing, of course, was that, who was in that video? Princess Anne, the one who wouldn't be on the receiving line. She's perfectly happy to laugh about him behind his back, but doesn't want to touch him.
Well,
I get that.
Yes.
A lot of people feel that.
Everything happens behind his back. There's a lot of back.
Sure.
So it's hard to get around to the front.
To do stuff behind.
Just saying.
So I want to throw this in now because I think it's worth not forgetting, and that is that in addition to Wayne Messam and Joe Sestak, Kamala Harris has suspended the campaign.
Yes, I didn't get in there. Thank you for doing that. It didn't upset me greatly, only because I try not to invest very much in these early stages. But that's a major candidate and a major loss, and not like these minor leaguers dropping out.
Right, not just that, but what it leaves is the next Democratic presidential debate with all white people. Because Julian Castro and Cory Booker, who are excellent candidates, may not make the debate based on polls.
Yeah, that's crazy. We got to redo this stupid metric. I assume that it made sense when they were trying to formulate it, and now they're probably kind of embarrassed about this.
Well, it makes about as much sense as Iowa and New Hampshire going first.
Yeah, well, a little more. I thought money and polling; those are good things.
All of it should be redone. But I just wanted to read this from Paul Begala.
So it won't work ever again. Yes,
because for those of you who are Harris supporters, I thought it was worth mentioning here. So this is a thread by Paul Begala. He says, today's news that Kamala Harris is suspending her campaign after Governor Bullock and Beto O'Rourke did the same got me thinking.
Beto was a little major, yeah.
Right. I'd like to share some recollections and encouragement with the staffers and volunteers who busted their tails on those campaigns. I've been where you are. It gets better. 1988, I'm working on my first presidential, left my nearly perfect girlfriend in Austin, moved to D.C., Spent weeks in Iowa, including time in the hospital. We ran out of money. My landlord kicked me out of my room. My candidate quit. These things happen.
Yes.
I was broke, homeless, and unemployed. I moved in with a friend, slept on the sofa of his one-bedroom apartment. My girlfriend borrowed $5,000, which is almost $11,000 in these days, to keep me afloat. And thanks to them and the encouragement of others, I stayed in the fight. So stay in the fight. Find another cause, another candidate, another crusade. There's nothing dishonorable in losing, only in giving in to the bastards. We who believe in progressive change need you more than ever, and maybe, just maybe, the next chapter will be better. I mean, for me, 4 years later, Bill Clinton hired me. He won. The general's selfless girlfriend, she married me. And that buddy whose sofa I slept on, that was James Carville.
Yeah.
Been buddies and business partners for decades. It gets better. I swear it gets better, so hang in there.
But he married Mary Madeline, so, well, you know.
Well, we're not talking about Carville. We're talking about Begala.
True. So the lesson is don't let anybody on your couch, but keep fighting.
So be careful whose couch you sleep on. On the other hand, what happened today? VoteVets endorses Pete Buttigieg, the Progressive Veterans Group, first presidential endorsement since it was founded in 2006, which is kind of interesting. So there are four major candidates left. And although I always thought Amy Klobuchar was kind of my dark horse, it's tough to make the case that she's a major candidate when you look at the polls. So we're talking about Biden and Buttigieg and then Sanders and Warren, not to separate them because this isn't about ideologic lanes. It's about who you think ultimately is going to wind up being the best candidate to run against Trump. And I don't know who's going to win. I have no idea. But it's just interesting that this is just the way it shaked out. And is that because of the rules and the DNC had their finger on the scale? No. Voters really haven't decided who and what they want yet. And there's, in fact, a really strong field. So when you have people like Castro and Cory Booker not in the top tier, or Klobuchar not in the top tier, that just tells you that the top tier is actually pretty strong.
I guess so. They're doing something right.
They're doing something right. And, you know, sometimes this is about luck and timing and just the zeitgeist and the way the winds blow and whether currents lead. You know, it's got nothing to do with I was good or I was bad. You can't take this stuff personally if your candidate doesn't win. You can take it personally if Trump wins because that's a disaster for you, your family, the country, and the world. But that's a different issue. And so whoever the Democrats wind up coming up with, you know, wholeheartedly support. So meanwhile, to the background of all of that, you have Trump making an ass of the United States and himself, since he can't separate the two, over in merry old England, and ruining NATO. And at the same time, you have the Democratic primary stuff going on here. But the background to all of that, of course, is impeachment. And the big news is that yesterday's impeachment report by the House Intelligence Committee was released, and it's got pizzazz. It's got a lot of stuff. It's got facts. It's got things we didn't know. Pages. It's got bombshells.
300.
A lot of pages, but, you know, there's a lot of news in there that we didn't know about, like the call logs that they obtained, probably by subpoena from the phone companies, but we didn't know that. They won't talk. We don't know when they got them. We don't know why they didn't call witnesses to.
I don't know how we would have missed the subpoena, though.
You know, I don't know. But anyway, they got them.
Yeah. And
so what do the phone calls show? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Here's ABC, 5 key takeaways from the House report on Trump impeachment. And by the way, for those wondering, there is a House Judiciary hearing today.
Yes.
To talk about articles of impeachment. Technically starts at 9, but the broadcast by the networks is going to start at 10, so we have a little bit of time. And we know that today is going to be the law professors, including the Republican witness Jonathan Turley and 3 others.
I see.
So how much pizzazz law professors are going to have remains to be seen. But in the meantime, as far as the impeachment stuff from yesterday, 5 key takeaways from ABC News. 1, Democrats say Trump placed his personal interests above the nation.
Well, yes.
And in fact, when I did the pundit roundup summary today, it was actually made rather easy by the House report. I haven't fully read it yet. It's really long. But In the very beginning, it says, as this report details, the impeachment inquiry has found that President Trump personally and acting through agents within and outside of the U.S. government solicited the interference of a foreign government, Ukraine, to benefit his reelection.
Right.
In furtherance of this scheme, President Trump conditioned official acts on a public announcement by the new Ukrainian president, Vladimir Zelensky, politically motivated investigations, including one into President Trump's domestic political opponent. Nice that he didn't mention the name. In pressuring President Zelensky to carry out his demand, President Trump withheld a White House meeting desperately sought by the Ukrainian president and critical U.S. military assistance to fight Russian aggression in eastern Ukraine. That's it right there. Trump did this to benefit his reelection. That's what this is all about. Mm-hmm. Okay. And according to NBC News, the report cites 2 instances of improper conduct, obstruction of the House inquiry, and withholding the aid from Ukraine on the condition of investigating a Trump political rival.
Yes.
Those are big deals.
Yes, large.
Okay, very large. And in the process of talking about that, they also note, page 35, President Trump's closest subordinates and advisors within the executive branch, including Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, Secretary of Energy Richard Perry.
Oh, really?
Perry, and other senior White House and executive branch officials have knowledge of and in some cases facilitated and furthered the president's scheme and withheld information about the scheme from the Congress and the American public. In other words, it's a RICO charge.
There's the problem. Yes. And an important point that they included in there, withheld the information from Congress. That's what makes it a huge, huge, huge problem and removes it from the realm of presidential prerogative.
Right. And so when people say, well, there's no direct evidence, that's because he was blocking the direct evidence, and that's going to be an article of impeachment.
Yeah.
So let's run down some of the phone information that is so interesting.
Okay.
Devin Nunes, according to Sam Stein, sought to undermine the investigation by alleging that Adam Schiff had coordinated with the whistleblower, all while never revealing his own behind-the-scenes communications with the very people at issue in the whistleblower complaint. In fact,
I did say that.
That's part of it. Impeachment investigators got Rudy's phone records, and Nunes and Giuliani were speaking.
Yeah, on the phone.
About this, okay? Here, call logs between Giuliani and the White House Office of Management and Budget revealed in new House Intel Committee. So that means Giuliani was speaking to somebody over at OMB. Could that have been Mulvaney? We don't know because they won't let Mulvaney testify.
Yeah, and it doesn't make any sense because who's Rudy Giuliani and why is the OMB taking his phone call?
And the funny thing is, Greg Jarrett on Fox is saying, well, we don't really know because after all, it could have been somebody else using Rudy Giuliani's phone.
Right. Or a shapeshifter from outer space.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, the hoops you have to jump through in order to say there isn't evidence is funny because today Jonathan Turley is going to be testifying. There isn't enough evidence. Well, duh, you're looking at it right here. Here's another one. NSC staff believe the September 9th letters to White House and state from congressional committees may have been reason Trump released the military funding. On September 9th, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and it's a select committee, so that means I still don't understand why Nancy Pelosi doesn't remove Devin Nunes. On September 9th, the House Permanent Select Committee, why doesn't she unselect him? On September 9th, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, the Committee on Oversight and Reform, and the Committee on Foreign Affairs announced investigations into the scheme by President Trump and his personal attorney, Mr. Giuliani, to, quote, improperly pressure the Ukrainian government to assist the president's bid for re-election, end quote. And again, this is all about the president's bid for re-election. Maybe you don't care about Ukraine. Maybe you side with Russia the way that Tucker Carlson does. That doesn't matter. What matters is that Trump was using this to cheat on the upcoming election. And the idea to allow him to do this, and let's just let the voters decide, is saying, let's let him cheat and see what happens.
Yeah. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. You know,
right,
that's
which is pretty much the GOP reaction to just about all election cheating. That's why they do voter suppression. So it's not surprising in that context that they don't object. But that's what's going on here. The committee sent document production and preservation requests to the White House and the State Department related to the investigation. NSC staff members believe this investigation might have had the effect of releasing the hold on Ukraine military assistance. So, no, it wasn't a perfect call.
That's weird. They keep saying it was.
Okay. So there are at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5 calls and 1 text between Rudy Giuliani and Devin Nunes. And that's kind of a big deal as well. So the call logs we're kind of like, hey, these guys are involved. And the idea that this just started on the July 25th call. No, we know from testimony from Laura Cooper, who was the Defense Department person who testified in the Intelligence Committee hearings, that as of that July 25th call, Ukraine was getting antsy about what's going on here and why was the aid being withheld.
Yeah, this is
and now there's evidence that this was going on even way before the call. So the idea that it was a perfect call and they just sort of got the wrong impression or they didn't know how could they feel pressured is just ridiculous, and the evidence just says otherwise. And if your defense is, well, you don't really know that Rudy Giuliani was on that call. You just know that his phone was.
Yes, right. That's
good luck.
I mean, the phone's personal to them. There's plenty of pictures of them carrying those phones around. We all know what cell phones are, and they're not the sort of things that you say, you know what, if you're thinking about a criminal
somebody
conspiracy,
else,
you can borrow my phone.
Rudy Giuliani that butt called a reporter and left incriminating information.
Yeah.
Right? It was just somebody else, right?
It's I mean, that's a dumb door to open. I mean, you say, well, we just don't know. That, of course, it didn't.
You don't know because you don't want to know. I mean,
right.
That's what just makes it so clear.
Yeah, that's the real thing. I mean, if it had happened on another.
Let me show you what kind of hoops I'm willing to jump in to make sure that I don't know. Because I've got these pencils in my ears, and why are you yelling at me because I have pencils in my ears? I can't hear you. I have pencils in my ears.
I mean, I guess if you really wanted to be serious about that, well, we just don't know who it is, then I guess you could just say, well, I know who it was, or I have a good guess. It was Donald Trump. Well, no, that's ridiculous. You have no evidence of it. But we don't not have any evidence of it, or something like that.
He called the White House.
Sure.
Giuliani is Trump's lawyer.
Yeah.
And Trump is his only client in the White House.
Yes.
Who do you think he was talking to?
That's true, too. And, of course, I love the designation. Everyone, I guess we have to pretend to be puzzled about who -1 is. That's how Rudy Giuliani designated. Look, everybody knows that was the president. As designated on his phone. He didn't want to put in Donald Trump or the president for various reasons. And I guess maybe some people were confused at just seeing the -1.
I thought he meant, no, he's not a perfect 10. He's actually a -1.
Maybe. But it's the -1 from individual -1 in the previous indictments for everybody else. That the unindicted co-conspirator designation, the individual one who was at that time president of the United States, did this, that, and the other thing. Round of from all the Manafort indictments.
Well, Daily Beast writes it up. Impeachment investigators got Rudy Giuliani's phone records, and they're quite revealing. Trump's lawyer was in talks with, among others, Devin Nunes, officials at OMB, as the president pursued a political agenda in Ukraine. So, no, the president didn't know about it, and these guys are all freelancing. That's not what the record says.
Yeah. I mean, look, if you're out there getting instructions to say, we just don't know who it could have been on Rudy Giuliani's phone, you're getting your instructions from one place and one place only. And by the way, it's the dumbest guy in the world, so I might not take his advice if I were you.
Oh, by the way, Devin Nunes took phone calls from Lev Parnas.
Yes, that too. Or maybe not. We don't really know.
Well, he doesn't.
He
could have, he said on Fox News. I just didn't know who Lev Parnas was. I don't take calls from randos.
Yeah.
Even though Lev Parnas has been in the news for years, and he is actually on the committee at the moment until Nancy Pelosi removes him. So, how could he not know? It's his job to know.
Yeah, he knew who he was talking to. I guess with Sean Hannity, the game was to try to pretend we don't even really know who this Les Parnak guy is anyway.
And remember, the phone call was July 25th.
Yeah.
But throughout April, Giuliani was placing numerous calls to unidentified individuals in the Office of Management and Budget, which is Mulvaney's shop.
Oh, well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so now the committee's report describes those individuals as part of a smear campaign coordinated with one or more individuals at the White House. So a lot of this had to do with getting rid of Yovanovitch, the ambassador.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, sure, there's plenty of evidence. So when Turley says there's no evidence, he's blowing it out his nose.
We have no evidence of where it's coming out of. It's coming out of his whatever, as a matter of fact. Abby knows where it's coming from, so we can ask her later. Yeah, this is pretty nutty, and I don't think it's going to fly, and people know who's who.
Well, Chuck Todd thinks it's going to fly. I saw him talking about this with Danielle Pletka yesterday and saying, well, of course, the Democrats, all the facts, all the evidence, and a mountain of proof, but what really matters is what Republicans think. So obviously the Democrats are losing.
Well, I guess in a certain sense, ultimately, they'll vote not to convict him, and that will matter in writing up the news. I don't know if it's going to matter in terms of the conclusions of the rest of America, other than Trump fans, but okay.
Well, again, just before the break, a reminder.
Yes.
Trump's approval rating should worry Republicans. If the president remains this unpopular, it's hard to see him helping his party in the 2020 elections, writes Jonathan Bernstein. So, yes, ultimately it does all matter. But meanwhile, what we have to look forward to in the next hour when the hearing starts is Doug Collins objecting to everything. Don't forget, Collins is the guy that jumps in and says, I object to these hearings. They're not legal.
I object to your objection.
We should table it. Let's recommit. Are you using Eastern Daylight Time or Eastern Standard Time? That makes everything you've ever said invalid. I move we replace Jerry Nadler, the chairman, with a toaster. I mean, he's going to come up with all sorts of stuff that's going to be garbage and gobbledygook just to try to disrupt and get under Nadler's skin. Unlike Adam Schiff, we'll see if Nadler is susceptible to it.
We'll see. I was wondering if that could be the reason why the television coverage isn't starting until 10, even though the hearing is called for 9. I wonder if they said the first hour is going to be
Doug Collins complaining. Let's get rid of this stuff.
That would be brilliant if they made that decision.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see.
That would only be better if they only had the Democratic questioning.
That would be pretty good.
The Democrats, and then whenever the Republicans are on, you break to commercial.
Yeah, right.
At least we find out what was going on.
Bring you Days of Our Lives for the next 5 minutes at a time.
Republicans on Fox. Everybody else can watch, just the Democrats.
Yeah, all right. Well, I would be supportive of that, even though it would be totally unfair somehow to somebody. We'll see what happens, and it would be hilarious if they break in only for, it makes sense. Look, the only thing we're going to cover is when you're actually doing work, not this stupid objection stuff. We'll be back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And the downside of having the excitement of the hearings this morning is that Joan will be stuck covering them, as a matter of fact. And so we'll be without a visit. This is unfortunate timing, and I'm getting the sense that these chairmen know exactly what they're doing to our show and are doing it anyway, and we'll have words.
I object.
Some point. Yeah, well, there's the word.
Motion to recommit.
Yeah. And by the way, just one more reminder for everybody: the fact that this is that intelligence as a select committee has no bearing on who gets to select who's on the committee. That's not something that rests in the speaker's hands. Although I suppose you could try to force through, and I guess in an extreme situation like with these guys, you could try to force through a resolution removing somebody, but it's not.
And win it on a party line vote.
Yeah, you could do that, but it's not something that the speaker gets to snap her fingers and say, let's do it, and it has implications of its own, and they may also be saying, why don't we have a different vote? How about a vote for giving him more rope? That's a possibility. Does anyone want to vote for that? Yes, I might do that. But yeah, select doesn't have anything to do with it. You should pretty much ignore the designation of select committee.
Well, what I can't ignore is that he's still on it, given the fact that he's a fact witness himself and a traitor. Yeah,
well, there is that problem, too. And a lot of people are talking about that. He probably should have, what are you going to do? He's an idiot and a hypocrite, and that's just going to be true forever, and you have to learn to deal with that.
Well, get over it is one way, and realizing that he's on the Intelligence Committee and ranking member at a time that foreign agents in foreign countries are working to destabilize the 2020 elections is another thing altogether.
True. The intelligence services have been dealing with that for some time, though, as they realized early on in the Russia investigation, we are legally obligated to brief the biggest spy Russia has working in the United States. So we need to retailer how we brief the United States Congress. That's a big problem, too.
Yep.
So they've known that, and they've dealt with it as best they can. But this is just another reminder of exactly how difficult this is to unwind legally, and how much latitude the president's team has to do things that, if anyone else were doing them, they would find themselves on the wrong end of an espionage investigation, and looking at the electric chair. But
meanwhile,
we do here.
Another Ganef here, Representative Duncan Hunter pleads guilty to conspiracy to misuse campaign funds.
Right.
Well, he's still in Congress.
After insisting that it was all a witch hunt, which sounds awful.
Not only a witch hunt, the witch was my wife.
Yeah.
You should be hunting her. She did it. She was my campaign finance manager. She did everything. While I was having affairs with 5 people, she was misusing my funds.
That is wacky. Yeah.
But actually, what he says, actually, I did it.
Yeah. But I guess he gets to sit there until we do something. I mean, we should be expelling him, I guess. I wonder what the vote would be on expulsion for a guy who just pled guilty to all this stuff. I think they should do it. I mean, why should the Senate have all the fun of putting its Republicans on record acquitting an obviously guilty president when the House could put Republicans on record in the House voting not to expel a convict?
Anyway, while we digest all of this, the 300-page report from the House Intelligence Committee, the Democratic report, the Republican report is too laughable to even mention. I will point to this Paul Waldman article, no relation to David, May 31st, 2017, Trump's pathological obsession with being laughed at. Very good, because, in fact, he does have this pathological obsession. And, in fact, remember, one of the things he always says in his running, you need to elect me because the rest of the world is laughing at us behind our backs. That's because he's upset with everybody laughing about him behind his back, because they do.
Yes.
This is nothing new for Trump, says Waldman, and this was in 2017.
Yeah.
He's been talking about us being laughed at for his entire career in public life. And so it actually has a word. It's gelatophobia. Not gelato, G-E-L-A-T-O.
Oh.
That's, as somebody points out on Twitter, a xenophobic fear of ice cream.
Yeah.
It's gelato, G-E-L-O-T-O, phobia. The experts on this can weigh in on the pronunciation and what it all means. There comes a time for every president when they have to choose between doing the right thing and doing what will make them look good. If you have a powerful feel of being laughed at, your decisions will be shaped by avoiding the thing that scares you. And the results, well, they might not be funny at all. So that's where we're at. And that's where I'm going to leave you for today. We got stuff coming up. I'm going to go watch some of the hearings myself. We'll see what C-SPAN has, even if the regular networks aren't doing it till 10. And I think that there's going to be a lot to talk about tomorrow when I'll be back, and we'll cover what the law professors have to say, and we'll see whether or not they have as much pizzazz as the Intelligence Committee report did.
Yeah, I guess I'm dumbstruck by the fact that this is so close to gelatophobia. I'm not going to get my head around that. I'm going to look up the pronunciation of that.
Yeah,
but it opens up a door for a lot of fun commentary.
It's a xenophobic fear of ice cream. It's, Italian ice cream.
Sorbet phobia is next, apparently. All right, well, or some sort of soy
sprinkle
product.
or Jimmy phobia, right? I mean, depending upon what part of the country you're in.
All kinds of opportunities here. Yeah. All right. Well, that's a weird. I think they should rethink that one. But he does have that pathological. In fact, isn't that supposedly the reason he's in public life at all? Wasn't there some theory that being laughed at, being made fun of by Obama at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, prompted him to actually make the leap and run?
So they say.
All right. Well, I mean, that didn't work out
and actually, it's completely in keeping with somebody with his personality type. So. That's the roundup for the moment.
All right.
And let's see what else we can talk
happens.
about here. One interesting thing I will throw in here, and this is different than the topics we've been talking about, but I think it's interesting. It's an article by two of my favorite political scientists, John Size and Lynn Baverick in the Washington Post. The surprising second choices of Democratic primary voters upend political cliches. And it'll go back to what I started in the beginning when we were talking about Kamala Harris. A war between progressives and moderates, voters don't see things that way at all. To many observers, the Democratic presidential primaries highlighted the profound ideological divides between the Democratic Party's moderate and progressive wings, as an Associated Press article put it, two wings locked in a bitter fight for control. The division supposedly shapes the race in profound ways. The New York Times, for example, has written that Elizabeth Warren and Mayor Pete are running in different ideological lanes, for instance, and that if voters sour on Biden, they would mostly turn to Buttigieg. And maybe that's how Democratic leaders and activists see the primary, but there's just one problem. Somebody forgot to tell the Democratic voters.
Yeah, all right.
Okay? In a large-scale project called Nationscape that we're conducting with our colleague Chris Tosanovich at the University of California at Los Angeles, we have queried more than 6,000 voters weekly since July, and I gather not all of them are in diners in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Using these data, we find a surprising amount of agreement among Democrats on major policy issues. Contradicting the conventional wisdom, clearly defined ideologic lanes don't seem to exist in the mind of most voters.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me a great deal, although we do pay a lot of attention to that lane thing. What kind of candidate is this?
Yeah, well, that's because there's always,
what else are you going to do?
People have problems with complexity and juggling lots of different things, so they try to make it as simple as possible. Well, it's all going to come down to crucial Waukesha County or the suburban soccer moms. It's a way to simplify everything in a way that you can at least grasp. But the fact of the matter is people make their choices in really complicated ways, including how comfortable am I with this person's voice on my TV for the next 3 or 4 years?
Oh, yeah.
That's different than whether or not I would like to have a beer with them.
True.
But that's as much a part of deciding who to vote for and not vote for as anything else. And, of course, it's also a question of, like, who's left. If you were a big Steve Bullock fan, you may just have to, recalibrate.
Yeah, that's true. You might just be out of luck there. Yeah, I thought that some of that might happen, and I guess it's perhaps most likely to happen in and around the area of Pete Buttigieg, considering that nobody's entirely sure what he is lane-wise anyway.
Right.
So it's pretty confusing. But, yeah, that's the thing. And also, by the way,
you could take somebody whose life is really complicated.
Yes.
Like Buttigieg.
All right.
Who is a small-town Midwestern mayor, happens to be gay. He's moderate on some issues, progressive as others.
Likes gelato.
And then just try to, pigeonhole him. Well, that's the McKinsey candidate.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't work. I mean, people are more complicated than that.
That is true.
But sometimes it sticks, like Deval Patrick is the Bain candidate, or Mitt Romney was.
Or Al Gore invented the internet.
That kind of stuff. So, it's if you have a persona who has been established for decades, like Biden, it's very difficult to dent that because everybody, quote, already knows who he is, end quote, whether it's true or not.
Yeah.
Right? They think they know. They think they know who Clinton was, Hillary Clinton. And with Buttigieg, still a little bit of a tabula rasa, so you get to write that. But what the political scientists go on to say, the Nationscape project supported by the Democracy Fund provides other reasons to doubt the Democratic Party is as divided as it's often portrayed, regardless of the candidate preferences. Democrats largely agree on many policies that have emerged as supposed litmus tests for who counts as moderate or progressive. In the past 4 weeks of our surveys, for example, 75% or more of likely Democratic primary voters support raising taxes on families making more than $600,000, raising the minimum wage to $15, having the government provide a job to any American who needs one. And supporters of the leading Democratic candidates are also not particularly divided on the policies. Right?
Yes.
Raising taxes on the wealthy is associated with Elizabeth Warren, but 78% of Biden supporters like it, and 87% of Buttigieg supporters like it. Such numbers hardly suggest the party sharply divided into two warring wings. Now, if you look at Medicare for All, which is probably the single biggest divider, those divisions are less sharp than many people assume. Among all Democrats, 68% support providing government-run health insurance to all Americans, and 65% endorse the enactment of Medicare for All. But even here, when support wasn't unanimous, it wasn't because significant fractions of Democrats opposed the policy. The rest are simply unsure. And so I'm not really sure about that. I don't know if that's how it's going to work out. In other words, when Warren and even Kamala Harris in that first debate raised their hand and say, we want to get rid of private insurance, I shook my head and said, that is a big mistake. Mm-hmm. That's not the same thing as saying, oh, now I can't support them because they raised their hand. That's a completely different issue.
That's true, too. Good point. Yes, and I guess analysts are also supposed to be in the job of saying, well, that was the reason that she's leaving now is because she made this enormous mistake, and it's probably more complicated than that, too.
Yeah, because Elizabeth Warren is still there.
Yeah.
And opposition to Medicare for All tends to be mild. Only about a quarter of Biden Buttigieg supporters outright reject it. Even among those voters, about two-thirds still have a favorable view of Warren and Sanders. So it's not like, oh, this is my litmus test issue, and if you don't agree with me on this, I can't vote for you. That's not how it's working.
Good. That's not
Now, the
sensible.
one framing of Medicare for All that leads to division is if you present it as the outright elimination of private insurance. That's why I said that was such a big mistake. And the reason is it makes people nervous. Forget about the facts. It makes people nervous because they already know what they have, and you're proposing something, and they don't know what you're proposing and how it'll affect them personally. But they're very aware of how their current insurance affects them personally.
Yes.
So 39% support abolishing private health insurance and replaced with government, and 33% oppose it, and the rest were unsure. And so only 49% of Sanders supporters favored it. So the idea is here, if you're going to inject uncertainty, you can't expect you're going to have complete support for a policy. But disagreement with policy isn't necessarily the same thing as disagreeing with the candidate. When people decide who to support or not support, it's an overall thing. I met her. I really loved the way she interacted with people personally. That's what people say about Kamala Harris.
Well,
she was fantastic on the campaign trail. But she didn't get good press, didn't have a lot of money, and had to drop out because of those things, not because she raised her hand in the first debate.
Yes. Well, don't blame it on that. And it doesn't have to make a great deal of sense, your reason for sticking with somebody overall. It happens, and all we can do is pull you on it. We shouldn't be telling you that doesn't make any sense.
The tendency to overstate, well, you and I do a pretty decent job, I think, of not telling people who to vote for. The tendency to overstate the ideologic differences among supporters of Democratic candidates is not new, they write. It happened in the 2016 primary, as we showed in our book Identity Crisis. Although Sanders supporters are more likely than Clinton supporters to describe themselves as liberal, the groups didn't differ that much. They didn't differ that much either. They didn't differ that much on key issues, including raising the minimum wage, increasing taxes on the wealthy, and whether the government should do more to provide health care and child care. Voters don't seem to follow these disagreements in detail, much less consider them profound divides. The other day I had an article, I don't remember if we discussed it on the show, about overall identity of a candidate is more important than the details. For example, everybody knows Elizabeth Warren has a plan, even though nobody has an idea of what that plan is because nobody read it. Right? Yeah. Whereas Kamala Harris, can you sum up her in a simple sentence? It's kind of difficult.
Yes.
Bernie's against the millionaires and the billionaires.
Right.
Joe Biden wants to get back to normalcy of some sort.
Without malarkey.
No malarkey. Let's get back to doing what we do best here. And Kamala Harris didn't have a one-liner that kind of summarized everything that she was. But why is that important? It sounds superficial, but it's actually a distillation of all of the different things that go into a candidate that make you decide to back somebody or not back somebody.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't have that.
Right? Democrats never win or lose on policy. Policy is vitally important, but you got to play the politics in order to get where you're going. That means, folks, if Biden is your nominee or Buttigieg and you didn't support them, you supported somebody else, suck it up and vote for him.
Yeah. Well, in the end, anyhow.
In the end. You don't have to do it now.
Right. You have plenty of time to be dissatisfied with your choices.
Except most Democrats going to the polls aren't dissatisfied with the choices.
But if you want to be,
only Mike Bloomberg
I'm open to it. Yes, that's true. By the way, one of the things I want to follow up on closely, I'm not certain whether this is the case, but anyway, I want to watch where the staffers go. A lot of these people are, insistent on working in a presidential campaign regardless, and it is kind of interesting and looks a little mercenary and weird because sometimes they land at campaigns that you would think, hey, you would ordinarily be thought to have no interest in that. But it is a good time to remind people that there's very little policy difference between the candidates overall, and so maybe it's a better fit than you think. But I was
it's especially interesting with Harris because don't forget a lot of the press was writing things like part of the problem with your campaign is your campaign staff sucks. So I wonder who wants him now.
That's a good question. It doesn't help your stock, I guess.
I think they were talking about her sister, but I don't know.
Oh, really? Okay, that may be. All right, well, then it won't be so bad for everybody else. And her sister's not likely to, in that case, then say, well, I'll just go work for
I'll just go
Bloomberg.
to work with Mayor Pete.
Right, yeah.
Or even better, I'll just work for Joe Biden.
Yeah, you're kind of stuck if you're on the staff because your sister, brother, whatever, something like that. But other staffers...
The complaint about Harris's
really big
campaign was that, as somebody put it, a lot of people had responsibility with no authority, and a lot of people had authority with no responsibility, and it didn't work.
Yeah, that shouldn't. But okay, I don't know the inside story there. Maybe we'll find that out in the days to come.
Right. But again, I go with the Paul Begala view of things that I started with. A lot of you busted your butts for her. Good for you. When you're ready, find somebody else. There's a lot still to do. And she's just a wonderful campaigns. She was a wonderful candidate. She is a wonderful person. And she's got a future.
Yes. Oh, I did see she had one of the best comeback to the poison pen comment from Trump, I guess, who commented on Twitter saying, well, goodbye, Kamala, we'll miss you, tongue in cheek, I guess. And did you see her response to that one?
No, but I would guess it's like, I'll see you in the Senate or something.
She said, don't worry about it, Mr. President. We'll see you at your trial.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I would say.
I mean, it is in the Senate, yes, but for a specific reason.
Yes.
Defendant Trump.
Yep.
Okay.
Anyway, that's a story, and we'll let you do the next 10 minutes, and then after that, the next hour, and I'm going to go watch the hearings and see how much business they have.
Enjoy yourself. Don't have any gelato phobia. Oh, I'm looking at a Wikipedia page on it, by the way. There is a opposite, of course. Gelotophilia. I'm not sure if it's that hard G or not. GIF, we'll never find out. But there is also, that would be the joy of being laughed at. But there is a related condition here, catagelasticism, the joy of laughing at others. And I think we found a good one there. That might be my favorite one of all. I think I have that. Yeah,
for those who love the Three Stooges and just can't get enough of watching somebody slip on a banana peel, there you are.
There's a real condition name for that as well.
Yeah.
And it's not even bananaphilia.
Yeah, Three Stoogephilia. Yeah.
All right. We always learn something.
Take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay. Take care. Tell us what happens in those hearings. We got to have at least one eye on that. And, we'll have at least three that we know of. 3 eyes. Both of Jones and one of Greg's. Could be that Greg dedicates the other eye to it as well at some point, but if not, no loss there. Well, but I am curious to find out whether they spend the first hour doing all of the objections and then the TV comes into it. All right. Just a little curious. Time to go back to the stories I have packed away, some of which we'll skip because they are too esoteric, and others we can't afford to skip out on here. Let's see. We have lots of impeachment hearing related pieces to skim over. Then, of course, the background stuff on all the calls and the logs and what they mean. And everybody has a X number of key takeaways from the House Intelligence Committee report article to share. I have seen 3 key issues, 5, 6, usually single digits, which is interesting because there really could be many, many very important key items to take away. I imagine, for instance, for the take on important pieces of the report to take away that's not limited by editorial considerations about the fear people have about there being a double-digit number of bullet points to read. You can head over probably to Marcy Wheeler, Susan Simpson, probably taking a good look at these things too. A lot of excellent online analysts who don't have to worry about their word counts or what numbers their headlines use to get the better view of things. But for the network types and mainstream traditional media types, I think they're being instructed to keep it down, keep the number down, a low single digit. Anyway, let's see. Lots of variants on the theme here. I do see, for instance, one, this is not a number of takeaway analysis here, but I do have TPM's piece from Nicole LaFond with a very interesting headline, and this was TPM, of course, lives in the middle, in between traditional media and sole proprietorship blog work like Susan Simpson and to some extent Marcy Wheeler as well, though she has co-bloggers. Anyway, interesting to see in the headline. Nadler reassures caucus he's ready to take over impeachment, and then the quote, I'm not going to take any S word here. And the TPM goes with the SH asterisk T version of the S word in the headline. And that sounds good. That's probably what people wanted to hear. We'll see whether he lives up to it or not. I don't agree that with the view that he had done such a terrible job up until this point. It was really more about whether or not he was going to go with the 5 minutes for every member approach or letting the council do the questioning. And having seen, well, they certainly had great success with letting the council do the questioning in the Intelligence Committee. They had limited success with it at some point in the Judiciary Committee before it all got handed over, or before the Ukraine focus developed in the Intelligence Committee. But there wasn't as much call for letting counsel do the questioning, I don't think, given the focus of what the Judiciary Committee was doing at the time. Now, I think there's more call for it, and they are rightly going to adopt that format. Anyway, let's see what he means about not taking any crap, at least with respect to what he's telling the caucus here. House Judiciary Committee Democrats met behind closed doors for 6 hours on Tuesday for a private preparation session ahead of the panel's official overtaking of the impeachment inquiry Wednesday. And the committee's chairman, Jerry Nadler, used the prep time to offer some candid reassurance to his caucus. I guess, although he's speaking to the committee Dems, but I guess word is getting out to the caucus. It wasn't like, I can't tell whether they're mixing things up and they also had a general caucus meeting or whether they're referring to the caucus, in this case is the caucus of Judiciary Committee Democrats or what. It's not usually the way the term is used. But anyway, he goes on and says, I'm not going to take any crap, but he uses the S word. And in the body of the article, they go with the whole thing. They don't bother with the asterisk or anything. So bold Politico, or rather TPM reporting. I say Politico because they note that this is a quote pulled from Politico's coverage. So anyway, I'm not going to take any crap, he didn't actually say, according to Politico. The remark made some lawmakers in the room straighten up in their seats because it's profanity. People in the room told Politico. That's interesting. And it's just, you should have used TPM's online pedigree as license there to say, I'm not going to take any S, he said. The remark made some lawmakers straighten the F up in their seats. People in the room told those sons of bitch bastards at Politico. I don't know, just throw some extra stuff in there. The Politico described the meeting as a dress rehearsal for the upcoming hearing in the House Ways and Means Committee room. That's interesting, too, where the Intelligence Committee held all of its hearings in that space. I didn't even take note of the fact that that was going on. Ways and Means Committee room is large, spacious, a great television venue, and I guess probably the Intelligence Committee didn't have space like that. I would have thought that the Judiciary Committee had better, more telegenic space, but really, I guess the Senate Judiciary Committee is the one that spends most of its time on television. The House Judiciary Committee, not so much. But I guess that's the thing. You get to borrow Ways and Means' committee room for a television setting. Anyway, the committee held a mock hearing, and ex-staffers were brought in to play the roles of Representatives Jim Jordan and Doug Collins and other aggressive minority members of the committee. That's interesting. Ex-staffers? All right, well, I guess they had to expand their roster there. I got a good time playing that role, I'm sure. Just take your coat off and start yelling. Committee members reportedly feel confident in their approach and Nadler's leadership heading into their first big hearing on Wednesday, but some lawmakers privately told Politico there is some concern in the caucus about Nadler's approach and demeanor, a fear, a phobia, if you will, that Republicans plan to seize on Wednesday. As Playbook reported Tuesday, just to try and keep the days correct, as Playbook reported Tuesday, Judiciary Committee Republicans feel that Nadler will be easier to rattle than House Intelligence Committee Chair Adam Schiff. I think we did manage to get a hold of that mention yesterday. Why? Because he often relies on notes for much of his statements and questioning. I don't know. I hadn't noticed that to be the case, but it probably is. I just hadn't been looking that closely. We'll see. That'll be very interesting. And, of course, he'll have staff and lawyers there to whisper in his ear as well and try and keep him on track. And all he really has to remember is pound that gavel and tell the other guys to shut up, and he'll be well reviewed. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's see. Perhaps the best way back into some of this discussion, we'll back up a little bit. I'll bring you one of those key highlights things just to make sure that we're up to speed on things. It'll give us lots more to talk about. I think they've upped their number over at Politico. I'm not certain what number they were going with yesterday, but they've decided, I think they went with about 5 takeaways, and now they're up to 8. They discovered more. It's a long report. People had to file their stories well before they were able to read through the entire thing. The online independent bloggers were scrambling all night for this stuff. So you're going to have to look at a variety of sources, but just for an example, we'll take a look at what Politico put together. Nunes's role exposed, and 8 more takeaways from the Intel report. We've compiled the top revelations in the 300-page Intel panel report. They thought they had them. They added more. There will be others. A different one will turn out to be the top, the tippy top, as Trump says, the rest of us say, of the important takeaways. But it's as good a place as any to start. Darren Samuelson and Natasha Bertrand working on this one for Politico. The House Intelligence Committee's highly anticipated report concludes that President Donald Trump abused his power by pressuring Ukraine's president to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden. By the way, before I even get into this, I did see a good tweet from somebody, one of the people who I typically think of as a little bit, not conspiracy theory-ish, but a little out front and partisan, of course, but so am I, in his theorizing, and I can't recall which one exactly it is, but makes him somebody who I don't follow him, but I see him retweeted into my timeline quite a lot. Usually making decent points, but I feel like I have to wait for other confirmation to catch up with, and he's hit or miss with the predictions, but I thought a good point being made, and I wish I had put it aside, but a good reminder that I and I don't know who you would use this with. I mean, maybe it's just worth keeping in pocket. And if you find yourself discussing the impeachment with somebody who's still a little bit skeptical in terms of, I just don't believe that the President of the United States would stake something as important as Ukraine aid, even if one of the problems is he didn't think that was important, but it wouldn't stake something as important as Ukraine aid or the visit to the White House or whatever, based on, why would he be making Ukraine policy based on getting dirt on Biden? It's too early to even know whether dirt on Biden is going to be useful or helpful. And I think it's a good reminder that I saw in these tweets here, which I'll never will dig up because I can't even remember remotely who did them. But if it happens, we'll see what happens. If it happens, it happens. If I see them again, reminding everybody that there were other reasons why Trump was interested in essentially extorting, bribing Ukraine and its government here, even before it was clear that Zelensky was going to be the next president. Even Poroshenko, he was interested in getting this out of. There was good reason to be interested in what they could make Ukraine do. Remember, there's even longer than they've wanted dirt on Biden, they have wanted to clear Russia of its campaign, of the charges that it meddled in the campaign of 2016. And one of the strategies that they settled on for doing that is pinning the blame on someone else. That would probably be Russia's preference that it be Ukraine, because they are beefing/warring with Ukraine already. So why not? And they've been targeting Ukraine with all sorts of disinformation and propaganda for a long time. How do we know this? The previous prime minister of Ukraine traveled all the way to Washington, D.C. to tell the then congressional leadership about it personally. And we have tapes of the then Republican leadership discussing the fact that they had met that very day with the Ukrainian prime minister, who told them all about the problems they were having with Russian propaganda in their country. That's what the conversation in June of 2016 was really all about, even though we all remember it for Kevin McCarthy's ridiculous blurting out that he believed that Putin paid Trump and Rohrabacher. Yes, just to reiterate that point. Anyway, yeah, so for a long time, the Russians have been interested in Americans coming to believe that it wasn't Russia that did all these rotten, nasty, mean, terrible things to the United States. It was, in fact, Ukraine. And, Americans have such difficulty telling the difference between Ukrainians and Russians, so couldn't it be your own confusion that led you to the conclusion that it was Russia when it was really Ukraine? And in addition to all of that, they're later, but still earlier than the Joe Biden thing developed, they're later developed the need to try and help exonerate Paul Manafort and to seed the disinformation that the Black Ledger, the so-called Black Ledger, which helped seal his fate in his criminal trial here in the United States, was somehow faked up, falsified evidence released by the Ukrainian government in an effort to somehow, they still try to say, help the Hillary Clinton campaign. And I guess, there were hints early enough that could have been effective. I mean, after all, Paul Manafort, the Trump campaign did have to put on a show of sidelining Manafort during the campaign because of the appearance of this Black Ledger. So it became their theory, well, the reason we have to shunt this capable political operator, effective cheater, aside at a critical point in our campaign during the 2016 campaign is because Ukraine came up with this ledger, and they could only have come up with this ledger not because it was true and they wanted people to know that a prominent operative in American politics who could become a key advisor to someone who could become the next American president is a liar, cheater, briber, extorter, thief, mobster, scumbag, international menace. Is that enough labels? But that people should know about it and try and make sure that the guy he's advising doesn't become president. / that the other person does become president, because you guys only have two choices in your country. That's the way you've designed it. It doesn't necessarily mean they're pro-Hillary Clinton, but it did mean we don't want that mobster's favorite other mobster to be in a position to advise the chief mobster that you might elect. So at any rate, the point really is that it's not late-breaking news, and you don't have to buy into the concept that all of a sudden Trump realizes that Joe Biden might become the nominee and retroactively, retrofits his Ukraine policy backwards in time in order to make it seem like he was worried about Joe Biden for longer than anybody has been considering him really running for president. He was doing this, pulling the same act for a long time, and he just kept adding reasons and shifting the goalposts. Right? So he certainly could have started out with, well, we need you in exchange for the meeting you want, in exchange for the aid you want, and all the things you're going to be asking us for in the future. We need you to allow us to sort of shift the blame from Russia to Ukraine, possibly. We can't hold you responsible for it. We can't put you in jail, so don't worry about it. Plus, we might, wink, wink, give you the money anyway later on. And then the ante gets upped. If they start to agree to a deal like this, well, there's another thing we need, is we also need you to disavow the Black Ledger. Well, we might get to that too. Anyway, can we get that meeting and can we get that aid? And then at some point, at that point in the game, the person that they've been blackmailing and extorting in all of this, Poroshenko, loses his re-election bid, and instead we're going to be dealing with this Zelensky guy. And Zelensky, I don't know whether they clued him in on their interest in having Ukraine take the rap for the election meddling, but that doesn't sound like something Zelensky would go in for. Anyway, I don't know if they approached him about, can you say the Black Ledger was fake? Him being an anti-corruption guy, maybe he doesn't go for it there either. After all, the Black Ledger was evidence of corruption in the Ukrainian government, and it wasn't likely he was going to disavow that. So what else can we squeeze out of Zelensky? I have an idea. Now circumstances have changed. Joe Biden is a serious candidate. He might even be considered the front runner. We think we can get dirt on him, or if not, we think that we can convince the Ukrainians to help fabricate that dirt. Let's try that with Zelensky. So they did, and then they moved the goalposts even more on him. Well, you can have a White House meeting if you do this stuff. Well, we'll look into whether or not we'll do it. All right, well, another thing, you're not getting that aid either. Oh, well, that we really do need. Which leads us to the story that Greg mentioned of Ukrainians. Now, more evidence being produced that Ukrainians did, in fact, know that the aid was being withheld at the time of the July 25th call. For a while, that was a Republican defense, that there couldn't be a quid pro quo because the Ukrainians didn't even know that the aid was being withheld. So there was no opportunity for them to think or to get the impression from American operatives at any level that they were being extorted for their interest in the money. They probably already thought the money was coming. So that was the idea. If they didn't know that the aid was being withheld, there couldn't be a quid pro quo because they wouldn't be able to imagine anything had to be traded for that money since they thought it was still coming. And now we learn, not surprisingly, no, they knew the money wasn't coming. I don't know why anybody ever believed that one. I guess it was just because people in suits were saying they didn't know, and there was no other outside proof available to the rest of us at that time that they did know. Now that proof is available, but even without that proof, how could you not imagine that the Ukrainians, desperate for cash and for aid and for weapons and for symbolic acceptance of their cause by the President of the United States, while involved in a war in Russia, how could you imagine that they weren't watching the wires, the bank transfer reports every day, waiting for this money? July 25th is pretty late in the fiscal year. Remember, this was money that was appropriated for the fiscal year 2019. By the end of July, you're talking about August and September are left in fiscal year 2019. So that's 2 months. There are 12 months in a year. That means 10 months have gone by, although we didn't pass the appropriations bills on time. I'm sure they were very late. But essentially, those bills were passed. The money was supposed to have been appropriated for several months. And, days, hours count when you're, at war with Russia and involved in a real legitimate shooting war where people are dying, and you're waiting for this money that's supposed to help you fight this war. You're probably checking hourly whether that money, and when it doesn't show up. And remember also that American congressional delegations, staff delegations anyway, have arrived in Kyiv asking, how's it going with all the money we sent you? And they're saying, the money isn't here. And alarm bells are going off, right? They have to have known that. They knew that they were supposed to be getting money, and the money wasn't showing up. Something was obviously wrong, certainly by July. So why we're surprised that they knew, I don't know. Maybe we're not. What we should have been surprised at is, how could you seriously believe that the Ukrainians didn't notice until August that the money was missing? And, now we don't have to worry about that because we know that wasn't the case. All right. So Politico's article here continues on. The report, remember the House Intelligence Committee report? That's what we were talking about. The report, which will form the basis of articles of impeachment, or at least those articles having to do with Ukraine, states that Trump endangered national security, undermined the presidential election process, and put his personal and political interests above those of the nation. All true. They say they pored over this document and highlighted the most important revelations. And there are now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 areas to jump to with links right up at the top if you don't want to read them all in order. But we'll do it because it's not that long. First one is obstruction. The House panel sent a strong signal that Trump can expect an impeachment article not just for the Ukraine pressure campaign. He's also in trouble over his efforts to obstruct the lawmakers' investigation, including for blocking access to witnesses, documents, and testimony. In all, Schiff's report counted a dozen current or former administration officials who declined to testify for his investigations, with 10 of them refusing despite getting subpoenas. And, of course, yesterday we got the news that Don McGahn's subpoena supposedly can be enforced more or less immediately. Also called out, the White House, Office of Management and Budget, and the State Defense and Energy Departments all failed to produce any documents to the intelligence panel, even under subpoena, which, as I said, not only creates the appearance of impropriety in all of this, we refuse to answer questions, but is an impeachable offense all by itself. Impeachment's kind of a blunt instrument, and so is, somewhat more nuanced instrument is congressional oversight. But if they subpoena you and say, look, we got to know this, and you say no, they're entitled to assume that there's something seriously wrong and go ahead and try to impeach you for that. But in the meantime, they have the more solid case of impeaching you for refusing to answer any damn questions, the answers to which, if you were not guilty, could be provided and would clear your name. But instead, you chose to roll the dice. There's only one thing we can assume about that, and that's your guilt. And so we'll put you on trial for refusing to be open and transparent, and that's their prerogative. They can do that. Next up, Dems accuse Trump of attacking witnesses. I'm glad they are pointing this one out individually. Democrats say Trump may also have broken federal criminal laws by attacking and intimidating witnesses. They cite 4 specific examples where the president turned to Twitter to go after people who were called to testify before the House committee, as well as the whistleblower who was subject to more than 100 public statements during a 2-month period. While Trump is unlikely to be prosecuted for any such crime while he's in office, that is, if we believe in the OLC memo, the House report doesn't hold back in setting up the stakes. Should he lose re-election and become a private citizen again in 2021. Violations of the law on witness intimidation, the Democrats note, carry prison sentences of up to 20 years. That might be wishful thinking, and I wouldn't mind watching him rot in prison. But it's important to note, though, that's what's at stake, and Trump knows it, and that's probably part of the reason why he's so very compelled to cheat. It's not just his gelotophobia, however you pronounce it. By the way, I do have that open here. So maybe we'll just run that. I'm curious, too. I'll turn the sound all the way up on the other computer and play the YouTube pronunciation guide, how to pronounce this word. Let's find out. Just curious. Are we going to have a commercial before we do that? Let's see.
Gelatophobia.
Gelato? It does sound like gelato, doesn't it?
Gelatophobia.
It does. Well, gelato. I will differentiate by saying gelotophobia, and even if it's wrong, just to differentiate between that and the xenophobic fear of the Italian ice cream. Anyway, next up here. Before I move on from the intimidation of witnesses, one more little bit of advocacy for ignoring the OLC memo on this. None of the underlying logic of the OLC memo applies in this case. It may never have applied. It was bad logic to begin with, but it certainly doesn't apply here. There's nothing, you're not distracting the president from anything in particular, and he's at least 51% criminal, 49% president, and I wouldn't worry about it too much. Nunes plays a big role. That was the big splashy news of the evening. Notably, the panel's ranking member, GOP Representative Devin Nunes of California, plays a role in the report. Phone records obtained by the committee show that he spoke several times to Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, earlier this year, around the same time that Giuliani was publicly attacking Marie Yovanovitch, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine at the time, and arranging a trip to Ukraine to dig up dirt on Joe Biden. The records also show that in April, Nunes spoke to Giuliani's recently indicted associate Lev Parnas, whose lawyer has claimed that he was explicitly tasked by Trump. Oops, I've left the sound way up in the middle of all of my other messaging. I've got to get rid of that so we don't hear that anymore. That was a note coming through from Greg, I guess, about what's happening in the impeachment hearings. Let's just check that. Sahil Kapoor's tweet he sent on here. House Judiciary impeachment and hearing kicks off, and GOP Representative Sensenbrenner instantly interrupts with an objection. He used to be chair, so he knows his way around this stuff. Another seeks to make a parliamentary inquiry. Chairman Nadler says he's not in order and proceeds with his opening statement, so it begins. All right, so they didn't get around the mess by starting at 10 with the TV coverage. I'm curious what they did during the first hour, or maybe it's just some sort of preliminary work that didn't count as the hearing. Anyway, so pretty much what we figured. Now back to the Politico piece here about we were in the Nunes section here. He spoke to Lev Parnas. Parnas' lawyer has claimed he was explicitly tasked by Trump to investigate the Biden's activities in Ukraine. The secret meeting that he was, or the secret task that he was assigned at the Hanukkah meeting at the White House, right? Anyway, a former Nunes staffer turned NSC official who remains close with the ranking member, Kash Patel, spoke with Giuliani for 25 minutes on May 10th, just after Giuliani briefed former Ukraine envoy Kurt Volker on his upcoming trip to Ukraine, the records show. Nunes has railed against the impeachment inquiry and repeatedly accused Schiff of lacking transparency throughout the 6-week investigation leading up to the report. Nunes, meanwhile, never disclosed his calls with Giuliani or Parnas, despite the pair featuring prominently in the impeachment hearings. So just a giant hypocrisy charge for that one. Schiff is not being transparent, but you're hiding contacts with material players in the conspiracy. Yes, But so what? Right, well, but you're in trouble. And but for the fact that you're a member of Congress, I assume at some point he'll be insisting that he can't be indicted or arrested for any of these shenanigans, to put it lightly, because of the speech and debate clause. But that hasn't protected any of the other criminals who've been forced into criminal proceedings while sitting in Congress either. Although this one has a slightly better claim to that kind of protection. We'll see what happens on that one. Next up, Trump makes history. He enjoys that, but not the kind of history he's making. The report is dripping with a history lesson on impeachment, with more than 100 references to the Constitution and the rationale for why the country's founders included a mechanism to remove a sitting president. Trump, the report notes, breaks ground in American history too. House Democrats dub him the first president ever, quote, to seek to completely obstruct an impeachment inquiry undertaken by the House. And they award him with this distinction when describing his assertions of presidential authority to block congressional oversight. Even President Richard Nixon, who obstructed Congress by refusing to turn over key evidence, accepted the authority of Congress to conduct an impeachment inquiry and permitted his aides and advisors to produce documents and testify to congressional committees. That is an important difference. Trump insisted that the very inquiry itself was impermissible, even though there was no basis for saying so, and no judge who's ever heard any part of that claim has ever given it any credence at all. Next up, questioning Sondland's September 9th call. Remember, this was the very important point brought up a couple of days ago. The report casts doubt on testimony from Sondland about a September 9th call that he said he had with the president, in which Trump allegedly said he did not want a quid pro quo with Ukraine, then went on to insist on one. Right? Trump has used Sondland's testimony about that phone call as evidence that he did not try to extort Ukraine, but that testimony is at odds with the weight of the evidence and not backed up by any records the White House was willing to provide Sondland, the report says. Several outlets, including the Washington Post and Just Security, began raising questions about the veracity of the September 9th call when it was revealed that the White House had no record of it. Trump and paperwork, man. Sondland hedged his testimony in a later public hearing, noting that he may have been mistaken about when the call occurred. An analysis by Just Security posits that the call actually took place on September 7th and is the same call in which Trump demanded to Sondland that Zelensky publicly announce investigations into the Bidens and alleged Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. So at best, on September 7th, he says, I don't want a quid pro quo, but what I want is I will only give the aid and the meeting if Zelensky personally announces investigations into the Bidens, which is, of course, the quid pro quo we're talking about, in which he just said, I'm not doing it, but I really am. Both Ambassador Taylor and Mr. Morrison, relying on their contemporaneous notes, testified that the call between Sondland and Trump occurred on September 7th, the report says, which is further confirmed by Sondland's own text message on September 8th, in which he wrote that he had had multiple conversations, with Zelensky and Trump. Next up, Mueller, mentioned more than a dozen times. Robert Mueller's name appears more than a dozen times, including in the footnotes, starting with the fact that the July 25th phone call between Trump and Zelensky came the day after the special counsel testified to the House about the findings from his investigation into Moscow meddling in the campaign. With this backdrop, the solicitation of new foreign intervention was the act of a president unbound, not one chastened by experience, the House report said. It was the act of a president who viewed himself as unaccountable and determined to use his vast official powers to secure his reelection. Later, Mueller mentions address Giuliani's efforts to undercut the special counsel probe by circulating a conspiracy theory that Ukraine, not Russia, had been responsible for the election interference, as well as Victoria Tensing's brief role with her husband as members of the Trump personal legal team. Also here, we'll fit one more in, I think. The Trump echo chamber revealed. Tracking the Trump presidency with its constant social media presence and support from conservative allies has tested even the most seasoned professionals, but the House report pulls back at least some of that curtain when describing the smear campaign orchestrated against Jovanovic, who was ambassador until May of this year. It cites phone records showing calls between now John Solomon, that opinion writer at The Hill, and Parnas, the indicted Giuliani associate. You know all about him. It cites Solomon column from May of 2018, etc., etc. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. So much more to get to, but I think important to set the table by continuing on with this Politico piece. We ran out of time a little bit just before the break. What we were trying to get out here is that the phone records also show John Solomon, the Hill columnist who has since been booted from the Hill, was also a part of this circle. And so this was the development of the Trump echo chamber. Phone records show calls between Solomon, Lev Parnas, you know who he is, and it cites a Solomon column from May 2018 that references a letter to then Representative Pete Sessions of Texas. A letter that Sessions sent to Pompeo. All right, so here's how it's going. Solomon's writing columns about Sessions writing to Pompeo, accusing Jovanovic of disparaging the Trump administration. And so the Hill is busy blowing up the idea that Jovanovic deserves to be fired because Solomon is getting calls from Lev Parnas saying Pete Sessions, like me, thinks that Jovanovic needs to go and says that it's for the same reason and you should write an article about that. And they begin fanning the flames, and people read The Hill and say, that might be a legitimate news source and a legitimate news report at that, and are supposed to begin thinking, hey, Jovanovic deserves to go, so that when she is fired, there isn't an uproar about it. So let's see. The report also cites a series of Trump, Giuliani, and Donald Trump Jr. tweets and comments that came in the days after the publication of the Solomon article. Comments that only amplified the controversial allegations he made and tacked on new conspiracy theories related to both Biden and Ukrainian interference in 2016. In other words, the report makes a big deal of illustrating, here's how it would work. Lev Parnas would call John Solomon and give him this nonsense dirt on Jovanovic. Sessions would write this letter to Pompeo and tell Parnas that he was doing it, and Parnas would tell Solomon, and Solomon would be like, scoop, Pete Sessions is backing the dismissal of Jovanovic in a letter to Pompeo. And then suddenly more phone calls, and all of a sudden Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and Donnie Jr. are now tweeting about how bad Jovanovic is. And so the idea is that the American public at large will be reading the John Solomon column at the same time that they see tweets from the president, his son, and Giuliani, etc. All the article and the tweets alleging that Jovanovic is somehow corrupt and has to go, and then they will go ahead and fire her, and everyone will point to those things as proof that this really had to be done, when in fact it was just a coordinated smear campaign. You say this in the Hill, I'll tweet about it so that lots of people see it. And, what should you put in your article, John? Well, Lev Parnas will call you about that and read you what he read to Pete Sessions when he dictated the letter that he was supposed to send to Pompeo. But it was all supposed to look in the public eye like corroborating evidence, but instead it's all just coordinated stuff. You say this, and then you say this about that, and then I'll say this about what you said about what he said, and then it'll look like it's organically happening, that there's just this widespread conversation about how bad Jovanovic is, when it's really just me planting this seed, you publishing it, you tweeting about what got published, and me talking about what you were tweeting. Now it looks like there's 10 of us talking, and it's really none. Anyway, next up, Lutsenko's new lawyers. Giuliani says he passed on representing former Ukrainian prosecutor Yuri Lutsenko. That's the guy who came after Shokin. But the Trump-aligned husband and wife legal team, Tensing and DeGeneva, agreed to take Lutsenko on as a client, the report found. And Tensing and DeGeneva, if they take you on as a client, you're guilty in this scheme, for sure. Probably for everything else, too. But they turn up like the Forrest Trump, that's good, actually, Forrest Trump, rather than Forrest Gump of this story. Anybody who's anybody in the corruption circle here ends up getting represented by these people. And I don't know how they're going to come out in court, but everybody we just spoke about in this circle of telephone calls is represented by or set up in some way with Tensing and DeGeneva. Lev Parnas is working for them, allegedly as a translator. John Solomon is represented by him. Lutsenko is represented by them. So it's a very odd thing. Anyway, Giuliani told the Wall Street Journal that he declined to represent Lutsenko on certain personal matters in January because of a potential conflict of interest stemming from Giuliani's work digging up dirt on Joe Biden and Ukraine, which is an odd thing for him to even bother with. But okay, since he's corrupt to begin with, which he has said he was doing for another client, the digging up of the dirt, that client being Donald Trump. 3 months later, Lutsenko found new representation in Tensing and DeGeneva, who also represents Solomon, the Hill journalist whose opinion pieces on the Bidens, Jovanovic, and Ukraine have mirrored Giuliani's talking points. By the way, Tensing and DeGeneva also, again, just as a reminder, representing Dmitro Firtash as well in his extradition case. The retainer agreement obtained by the committee stipulated that Tensing and DeGeneva would help Lutsenko discuss with U.S. government officials the evidence of illegal conduct in Ukraine regarding the United States. For example, interference in the 2016 elections. So, right there in the retainer agreement, it says, what we're doing here is we'll represent you for the purposes of spreading this disinformation about Ukrainian interference in the elections, not Russian. Last bit here, so many phone calls. Schiff and his top aide on the intelligence panel, Daniel Goldman, are former federal prosecutors, so it makes sense that they'd ask for phone records from AT&T and Verizon in their Ukraine investigation. I see, by the way, Republicans are aghast somehow, and I guess the hot thing to do on Twitter is to allege that there was some sort of illegality involved in getting the phone records. How could Congress get the phone records of Rudy Giuliani and the president and all these other people? Well, they got Rudy Giuliani's because he's just a regular person. They didn't subpoena the president's phone records. And I don't know how, if they got them subject to subpoena, that we missed the fact that the subpoena was issued. That's the sort of official action that's usually noted in a press conference or press release at some point. It's possible that we just missed it. It's possible that they didn't have to resort to subpoena. They may have made the request, and AT&T and Verizon may have complied with the simple request because it's not the content of the calls. Call records aren't that heavily protected usually, and if it was clear that they would just come under subpoena anyway, They may have decided to comply, for a number of reasons, not the least of which may be, we have lots of issues before Congress at all times. It's in our interest to be compliant with Congress's requests, especially if they're just going to make us give it up under subpoena anyway. Anyhow, they think that's an outrage, and it really isn't. But by the looks of the report, they hit the jackpot in asking for those records. Call logs cited by the House reference numerous contacts among the many players in this saga, down to the minute and second. There are 16 calls, for example, between Giuliani and Parnas between April 1st and April 7th, as the Trump associates worked to undermine Yovanovitch. In the same time period, Parnas and Solomon have 10 calls. The House report also describes multiple calls between Tensing, Giuliani, and Parnas, Giuliani and Nunes, Giuliani and the White House, followed by one that came soon after, lasting 8 minutes and 28 seconds, with an unidentified number. That one is the number in Giuliani's phone. When you bring up that number, is the one that he programmed in the designation -1, which I am telling you is individual -1, but okay. Giuliani and OMB also in conversation, according to the logs, and even a 48-second call between Giuliani and a number associated with then National Security Advisor John Bolton. So it'd be interesting to know whether they spoke or whether that was 48 seconds of, hello? Hello? Who's this? I can't hear you. A bad phone connection. Hold on a minute. John, is that you? Yes. Who's this? This is Rudy Colludi Giuliani. I don't want any part of your drug deal, Rudy Colludi. Goodbye. What? Click 48 seconds later. I don't know. We'll see. Or unless they try to blame that one on a butt dial too. I don't know. Was he butt dialing or dialing a butt? I'm not sure. You tell me. All right. Other stories that need some attention, as most of you are turning your attention to what's happening in the committee room, although Twitter reports on the subject say that the Republicans are not even doing a particularly good job trying to stall. They're looking pretty stupid. Let's see. John Godin reporting to us via Twitter here. Impeachment inquiry. Wow. Representative Doug Collins, Republican of Georgia, shouldn't try to talk so fast. Apparently, I've seen it also described as genuine frontier gibberish as well. So, not doing a particularly good idea, and most people's Twitter comments on it are, what is this, like word salad? He's not even saying anything. So, doesn't seem to be working out all that well for their obstruction plans. Speaking of the records that they got a hold of, let's just stick with that, even though there's a lot of other stories that I'd love to get to, but we'll dig into some of the details here. I saw an interesting piece in The Hill, which I don't reject outright all the time. They do publish some interesting things here. This is an opinion piece from Austin Evers, who identifies himself in the piece, but just down at the bottom, I want to grab this from the outset where they do the disclaimer. Who is Austin Evers? He's the executive director of American Oversight, a group that monitors the Trump administration, aiming to hold it accountable and ensure a transparent and ethical government. Evers served most recently as senior counsel in the Department of State for Oversight and Transparency Matters. So, watchdog group that he's working on. Here, the title of the piece, What Congress Can't Get, the People Can. Trump documents are damning, and there are more to come. So what exactly is going on with how these documents are coming to light? Throughout the impeachment hearings, he begins, members of Congress have decried that the Trump administration has not turned over a single document in response to the inquiry. And that's true. So you might be wondering, what are all these documents that we have about the phone records, right? Well, we'll let Evers tell you here. The administration's stonewall has been impenetrable, or at least it was, until November 22nd, when, thanks to a federal district court order, the State Department was forced to release documents, not to Congress, but to the public under the Freedom of Information Act. That night, my organization, American Oversight, received nearly 100 pages of records. The documents show a clear paper trail from Rudy Giuliani to the Oval Office to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, to facilitate the smear campaign against U.S. Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch. While the president and Republicans in Congress have tried to lay the entire scheme at Giuliani's feet, now we have black and white evidence showing Giuliani used the power of the presidency to execute the campaign. This is a critical moment for two reasons. First, that American oversight has been able to force the administration to release documents and will continue to push for additional records, shows conclusively why the administration's conduct qualifies as obstruction. If we, as regular citizens, got the records, there is no legal justification for withholding them from Congress, which is constitutionally entitled to this information. That's a good point. It now appears the sole reason the president has directed agencies and government officials to withhold documents is to impede the investigation into presidential abuses of power. Both Presidents Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton faced articles of impeachment for obstructing Congress by withholding information without a legal basis. Why does Trump believe obstruction will be any more effective for him than it was for his predecessors? No, because he's dumb and a narcissist. Second, this production is just the first of what will be many rolling releases in the months to come. Don't rush your impeachment. The evidence against the president and his allies will only get more voluminous and, it appears, more damning. When members of the House and Senate woke up after 2 weeks of public hearings, it may have felt like the evidence was largely settled. That is not the case. With continual FOIA releases, it's likely that there are other shoes yet to drop. Some of Trump's orthopedic shoes, for instance, I would guess, and with lifts in them. As members grapple with votes on articles of impeachment and trial, they should consider that evidence is probably going to keep coming out well into 2020. Even if they can, or think they can anyway, justify a no vote today despite all the evidence, that vote may look increasingly craven as time goes on. Think about that in terms, though, of the Pelosi strategy. And I guess you might be able to argue, if you're a hardcore proponent of the hurry up and do it already strategy, even though, more is coming. I guess, still, basically, if you believe, and I think we all still do believe, whether you're for rushing into this or not, or slowing it down and dragging it out, I think all Democrats are in agreement that it's probably pretty unlikely that Republicans are going to vote to convict in the Senate. I think we all agree that this is not likely to happen for bad reasons. Okay, so then we say, all right, well, fine. We put them on record as saying they believe Trump and exonerating Trump, and the evidence will be overwhelming, and they're going to be embarrassed, and people will take it out on them at the polls. And maybe if that's the best you can get out of it, then maybe this isn't such an awful thing, that you continue to bring out the evidence. The vote's already been taken, but no piling up of the evidence is likely to change those votes. Although I think maybe in the back of our minds we all believe, well, what if it was really, really, really super overwhelming? Wouldn't there be some Republicans who changed their minds then, even just to save their own skin? Maybe. But if not, then, it's not such a bad thing that you just say, well, you just look worse and worse for that vote as time goes on. And why not throw in the reminder that I told everyone before, that there is no reason why you can't just do the whole thing over again. It's unusual. I don't think we've ever seen anything like it. But I guess if there was a bunch of no votes cast, the Senate fails to convict him, and then it just becomes overwhelming. Like, this is just embarrassing. In order to save our own skins, can we have a do-over? You can. They might likely come up with something else instead and say, let's try him for this one rather than trying him again for the same one. That's the sort of thing that will rub people the wrong way, even though there's no prohibition against double jeopardy and impeachment. Why bother with explaining that when you could just bring them up on, emoluments charges and just say, everybody says, we'll use that excuse. We're sorry about the first vote. Now we're a yes. Or you just do it again and everybody's like, God, these lying sons of bitches in the Senate, unbelievable, right? that's not such a bad way of approaching things. Back to the opinion piece here. Notwithstanding the extraordinary mountain of evidence already available against the president, there are open questions we're still pursuing. Some of the FOIA requests we have pending include requests with the OMB and the Department of Defense about the decision to withhold aid from Ukraine. It's a good area to explore. Very important. With the Department of Justice, based on the president's suggestion that Attorney General William Barr was one of his point people on this issue. With the Department of Energy about former Secretary Rick Perry's role as one of the three amigos. And, of course, more requests to Pompeo and the State Department. According to the deposition testimony of Deputy Assistant Secretary George Kent, the State Department has collected documents about the Ukraine scandal, but is refusing to turn them over. Ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, testified that there were documents that he was not allowed to access, which would have helped him recollect details. The Department of Defense told Congress that it, too, was collecting documents, but was withholding them pursuant to the White House's direction. That means that there are vast repositories of evidence ready and available to be released under FOIA and that the American people are entitled to see. The first document release already connected the president to the smear campaign against Yovanovitch, just as it's clear why Secretary Pompeo tried to keep these documents from the public. It's obvious that this is just the beginning. The stone wall is cracking. All right, that is very interesting. And, of course, here's something that I could share with you in a few minutes we have left that might help bolster the case for things getting worse for Trump's defenders as time goes on, and that there might be some advantage to running this way. That is to say, let's commit them to the no vote early when they think they can get away with it, and then bring out the rest of the information and reveal, no, you should not have been able to get away with it. This from Kevin Cruz, everybody's favorite internet or a Twitter historian, except for all the other historians who think that they're, the better historian, who are also out there on Twitter, but have not done as well in the PR department with me because I have not seen them displaying the sort of sense of humor that Kevin does, and so ended up following him instead of you. But there's still room for you out there, aspiring humorist historians. Anyway, he's in Vanity Fair today, which I guess I have access to now, not only because it is December again, but because of the generous sharing that Kate Sherrill has done here in giving us a subscription access to it. Thanks very much, Kate. And I appreciate that very much. And even though I would have been able to read this anyway because it's December, suppose this had happened later on and it was beginning to look a lot more like Christmas at the time, and I had run out of articles, Kate would have saved us on that one. Trump's toadies should take note, Kevin says. Watergate says everyone goes down. The lesson Nixon imparts to today's POTUS loyalists is that courts of law and public opinion will judge them harshly. Good. They suck. That's how you should judge people who suck that bad. As the campaigns to impeach and remove President Trump has intensified, so have the defenses from his most devoted underlings. Naturally, these have included individuals closest to him, his adult children, his attorneys, and White House officials. More die-hard demagogues have taken fortified positions on Capitol Hill. As the impeachment inquiry kicks into gear, they are doing whatever they can to downplay the charges and delegitimize the process. In hearings, they demand evidence or dismiss evidence that's actually in front of them. In interviews, they dodge the problems and gum up the process, what they're doing now over in judiciary. In hearings, they demand, we went backwards there. Throughout, they hope that the volumes of their voices might overwhelm the volumes of evidence. I like that turn of phrase. These Trump loyalists have now lashed themselves to the presidential mast, and if Watergate is an American parable, most of them will go down too. Richard Nixon avoided prison time thanks to a pardon. Look out for that one. But all the president's men weren't so lucky. By the way, lots of people very excited about The evidence being shared by the Intelligence Committee report that appears to implicate Pence in all of this knowledge too. I don't know if we're going to be able to engineer it such that there won't be a President Pence for long enough to pardon former President Trump, even if he is removed. But, we're getting too far afield here. Anyway, as he was saying here, Nixon avoided prison time thanks to a pardon, but all the president's men weren't so lucky. 4 dozen were convicted of criminal charges, and about half did time, including Nixon's chief of staff, White House counsel, top advisors, and attorney general. Some of Trump's inner circle, including his lawyer and his campaign manager, are already locked up. Odds are they won't be the last. Nixon's congressional toadies avoided courts of law, but they couldn't escape the court of public opinion. Republicans fared so badly in the 1974 elections that prominent conservatives pronounced the GOP DOA. The party's name was, quote, poisoned with negatives, said strategist Richard Viguerie. It'd be easier to sell Typhoid Mary, the Edsel, or Tickets on the Titanic. William Rusher, publisher of the National Review, wanted to scrap it all and start fresh with a conservative party led by Ronald Reagan or George Wallace. Yow. Reports of the Republicans' demise were greatly exaggerated, of course, as Reagan's career made clear. No one waged a prouder defense of Tricky Dick. Everything has been, quote, blown out of proportion, the California governor said in 1973. The burglars were not criminals at heart. Wow. Even as evidence mounted over 1974, Reagan maintained the inquiry was nothing but blatant partisanship. Only in Nixon's final days did he grudgingly back impeachment. So it does happen, though these may be different animals. Reagan's fealty didn't harm his long-term prospects, but only because his prospects were long-term. He didn't face voters in 1974. When he challenged Gerald Ford for the nomination in 76, the man who'd given excuses for Nixon looked fine compared to the man who'd given him a pardon. By 1980, his water carrying over Watergate was a non-issue. But in 1974, congressional Republicans didn't have the luxury of Reagan's long game. Over 200 GOP members of the House and Senate were on the ballot that fall and needed to convince voters that their action, or inaction, over the president's conduct was correct. No one felt the pressure more than Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee. Keep an eye on them today. They were the first GOP officials who had to take an official vote on Nixon's conduct, and because he resigned before the full House and Senate weighed in, they would be the only ones to do so. In May of 1974, when their closed-door hearings began, Time reported that 53% of Americans wanted Nixon removed. But that same poll stressed that a hard core of 38% was solidifying into a loyalist bastion that is supporting him with growing determination. This not-so-silent majority made its feelings clear. That same month, 2 columnists, liberal Marcus Childs and conservative James J. Kilpatrick, published excerpts from letters sent by Nixon loyalists, charging that the rotten, slanted, and biased media brainwashed voters against their brilliant president. They warned impeachment was a political coup d'etat. Sound familiar? Except for the d'etat part. That would spark chaos. These loyalists spent the summer making their show of support for Nixon. One group unrolled a 20-foot-long petition in the Oval Office. Another held a pray-in on the steps of the Capitol. As columnist Art Buchwald marveled, the protesters wore giant sandwich boards with the name and photos of congressmen. I am praying for blank. For those in Congress, the message was unmistakable. Nixon loyalists, Washington Post columnist Joseph Alsop noted in June, constitute from 30 to 60% of the voters who elected every single Republican member. You can see how simple mathematics would therefore cause a strong, if reluctant, Republican consolidation behind the president. Initially, House Republicans, especially those on the Judiciary Committee, weren't reluctant at all. Representative Edward Hutchinson, a ranking Republican, said Nixon shouldn't be held accountable for every little impeachable offense. A millionaire from Michigan, Hutchinson complained in early 1974 that impeachment had been drummed up by some Eastern newspapers. Despite the damning evidence, Hutchinson remained unconvinced by the grab bag of allegations. Others agreed. Del Latta, a veteran Ohio congressman, had been drafted onto the committee. Columnists Roland Evans and Robert Novak noted for the purposes of defending the president. During sessions, he put on a show not unlike Trump's more animated defenders, letting loose grimaces, groans, and sneers at any Republican departing from the party line. Well, it does go on at some more length here. We probably would have been able to finish up had we started earlier in the game, but guess what? A lot of these people didn't return to the next Congress and took down a lot of people with them as well. And you might remember 1974 as the class that they called the Watergate babies, sweeping in one of the biggest freshman Democratic classes in history. So keep that in mind. Do finish up the Vanity Fair piece on your own if you're able to. I'll give you a link to it. And now stay tuned for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with our good friend Justice Putnam, bringing you all the many other stories that we didn't get to touch today, plus color on those that everyone's paying attention to regardless.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Let's start with some other stuff he's got here. A GOP candidate for governor has falsely claimed immigrants attacked tens of thousands of kids in his state. I don't think that's going to go over very well. And a GOP congressman is facing voter fraud and perjury allegations for listing a UPS store as his residence. That's a good one, too. Stay tuned for all this and more.